All right, everyone, it's Melissa again. We are going to go ahead and get started. I have pressed record, so those who are unable to attend are able to listen back to the archive of this session. As I mentioned before, I'm with AIR, the American Institute for Research. We have the honor and pleasure of hosting, facilitating activities on our CS for All Teachers virtual community of practice. Tonight, I'm especially excited to have one of our community ambassadors, that is one of our teacher leaders for the community, Brenda Burmeister, who is here with Kyle Sherman, and they're going to be discussing this amazing topic around entrepreneurship and CS and how that can equal success in your classroom. I will be listening in and in the background to provide technical support, so if you have any issues, feel free to post that in the chat window and I'll take a look and send you a message. I may send you a private message, so if you do reach out to me, just look for a separate tab at the bottom of that audience chat window. Currently it says there's probably just one tab that says everyone, but if I send you a private chat, there'll be a second tab and then it'll light up to let you know that I've sent you a message. We do ask, as we've mentioned before, we hope that you will get connected with your audio. We do ask if you're not speaking, and that includes our presenters as well, that if you're not speaking, to mute yourself. You can either do that on the top of your toolbar by selecting, there should be either a microphone or a phone icon at the very, very top in that grayish or black toolbar. If you select the drop-down arrow beside it, it gives you an option to mute your phone or mute your microphone. It also gives you, you can do that if you're connected by phone just directly on your phone itself. So, I will go ahead and turn things over to Brenda, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. So have at it, Brenda.
All right, thank you. So I'm Brenda Burmeister. I'm a teacher here in San Antonio at Northeast Independent School District. So I'm going to do a shout out to Sandra, who's a fellow middle school NEISD teacher. I teach at a technology magnet school, and I've also done the CivTech Startup Challenge with my students and with the San Antonio community. So that's actually how I met Kyle. So we're going to start tonight with a poll, just kind of get a temperature read of where everybody's at on entrepreneurship. So go ahead and just we'll take a moment if you want to just, everybody can click and log in, click for your answers, where you're at. Kyle, you want to vote too? I voted.
I threw my hat in. Oh wait, maybe that's where it went.
Yeah, you can just click on the little bullets. All right. All right, so it looks like we have, all our participants have voted. This is interesting, so it's black and white a little bit. We have a lot that have done this in their classroom and some complete newbies. So that's awesome. That's we're going to get a lot of good discussion going. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kyle Sherman. He is an English language arts and computer science teacher based here in San Antonio. He teaches on-ramp computer science, which is a University of Texas dual enrollment class. He participated in the CivTech Startup Weekend, where he led a team which became Cell to Cell, developing a more natural correspondence system for incarcerated individuals. He also has led a high school team in the city-created startup competition for 6th to 12th graders, which was an initiative of Youth Code Jam. I'm going to put some information in there about Youth Code Jam, which is just a really great community organization. It's a good model for doing all kinds of things with educators and students and doing jams to get out coding jams. So let's just start with sort of why to add entrepreneurship to your computer science classroom. It's a really great way to get students to collaborate and learn to work as a team. Obviously, those are the soft skills that careers are looking for. Students are developing real-world skills. They're investigating community needs and problems, which, at this age is really wonderful to get them engaged and advocate for things that they're interested in. And they get to practice communication skills with one another as well as during their presentations. Entrepreneurship really is project-based learning, all in that package. So I know a lot of districts are really pushing for that project-based learning. It might be a super easy way to get that ball rolling.
Yeah, yeah. As Brenda said, Kyle Sherman, by the way, chiming in. As Brenda said, this idea of incorporating entrepreneurship in schools isn't really a new idea. It is project-based learning. But what I really like is the practical applications that it does have for students. I think that really builds engagement when students are able to work on a project that they have personal investment in, that has real-world impact, and that is also, and I think real important, in a safe space. When most people think of entrepreneurship, they think of maybe some people, maybe one or two people, a small group, kind of siloed, working, 25 hours, 7 days a week type thing in their basement. But in reality, entrepreneurship is something that I think can come natural, and it just takes a little bit of helping the students understand that a lot of the skills that they already have just need to be tweaked a little bit for kind of a business-oriented style. So one of the ways that you can actually start entrepreneurship in the classroom would be to take something that's already established and then making it fit, your classroom. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. So one significant organization is Startup Weekend. They have other types of startups. They even have a Startup Week, but Startup Weekend, if you're unfamiliar, is an intense 3-day program that people essentially volunteered to do, which has them come in, pitch an idea, try to get people to vote on it. The ones that get picked actually form teams, and then they spend the weekend taking this concept that was just thought of Friday night and developing what we call a minimum viable product by Sunday, presenting that to a panel of judges, and then they get judged and ranked based off of how they took that idea and created a kind of working business model from that. So it sounds a bit foreign in the classroom setting, but if you really think about it, it's basically like any other project that you've ever done, whether it's in your biology class, doing a little presentation on cell structure, or in your English class doing research on an author. Things that are very similar in the entrepreneurship world that we already kind of do in the classroom is a lot of research, a lot of digging, and a lot of kind of collaboration. So doing this in the classroom, it may sound, like I said, it may sound kind of new and foreign, but it's really things that we already do, just kind of focusing it more towards kind of the entrepreneurship spirit. And what I mean by that is they instead of kind of providing them a topic to then do research and group work on, it's really the students that have to think about what their community might need. Think of a real world problem. And let's say you're going to do this in computer science, you actually have the advantage of adding that technical layer which students can then use to kind of think of problems not only right in front of them, but maybe something that's a bit more regional or even global. If they take kind of like a computer science, position. But for the most part, and we'll get more into the specifics, the students will form teams, they'll build a pitch deck, maybe even a prototype, and present it to the class. So just like the startup weekend that I mentioned, from concept to actually something producible within 3 days, that's in effect what these students will end up doing from all of that. So I'll take a little break here before I go into my CivTech team. And Brenda, I don't know if you want to chime in on anything I said, or anyone else for that matter. Any questions about startup or anything so far? All right, so this isn't just pure theory. I actually worked on building an entrepreneurial team that actually worked on a program specifically catering to helping the community and our local community. And we're located here in San Antonio, and lucky for us, the city of San Antonio worked with this organization called CivTech, and the city of San Antonio went to different departments within the city and asked them for actual issues or problems that they feel like they had. And they formulated these to about 9 different topics, and then asked middle school and high schools to form teams that would actually produce solutions to these problems. So you have kids that live in San Antonio looking at real-life San Antonio problems that's civic-oriented, and they had to follow kind of that same entrepreneurial path of identifying a problem, coming up with innovative solutions. One caveat of this program was that it had to be tech-centered, so they had to think of what kind of technology they could apply to producing a solution to this problem. And so me and my fellow teacher that's in the picture there, Ms. Asbell, we had a call out to our students, and we actually formed our CivTech team there. So most of the kids that you see here are actually freshmen, and they came from a variety of backgrounds. I had one that was tech-centered, one that was more focused on kind of the aesthetics of things, wanting to work on kind of marketing and stuff like that. And I even had a student that part of her independent study program was to be a project manager. So she was kind of the taskmaster of this group. So the problem that we decided to tackle for this was a problem that came from animal care services. So the team, the group there decided, based off of not only their expertise but their interest, they narrowed down their focus on animal care services. And what the ACS was looking for was some kind of new or updated alert notification tool for potential pet adopters. As San Antonio is moving towards a no-kill shelter, they wanted to more efficiently get pets adopted. So that was the issue that they were focusing on. And we started in late October, and things were pretty slow in the beginning. we're getting ready for presentations in February, late February, early May, and then things started ramping up closer to that time. So here are some images of the project progress. Now, if you're going to implement this type of program in your class as a curriculum, you probably won't face the same difficulties that me and my group face. My CivTech group, it was a collection of volunteers, and I think the biggest barrier for this program, for this project, was availability. So I'm not sure how familiar you are. I'm not sure what type of high school you may work in, if you do work in one, but at my high school, it seems like every student is engaged in about at least a half a dozen different things at any given time. So as much as we wanted to meet more often, we only had, one period per week, and it was pretty challenging to have everyone meet together and then for 40 minutes try to formulate ideas and really get the creative juices flowing before we're interrupted by going about our normal schedule. So if you're planning on doing a kind of civic-oriented or even just kind of a small business-oriented project for several weeks in your class, you probably won't come across the same problem, although I can say going through the whole startup process, when you have a good flow going, it's the worst to get interrupted by things like having to go to the next class, or even if you're not doing it in class. I remember doing the startup challenge. It was things like sleep and hunger that would actually get in the way of what I really wanted to do and what my group really wanted to do. So these are kind of real life problems that you can kind of have to overcome. But just getting back to just my CivTech group, these images here are kind of crude drawings of different brainstorming sessions that we had. So we're trying to, again, come up with a technical solution for the pet adoption. And on the left-hand side, the picture is kind of a system in which we're trying to figure out how to categorize different pets to try to match them with people. And the image on the right is more of kind of a broad idea of how this whole process will work. And like any great idea, you start off with grand ambitions. So our first one is to create an awesome app that would essentially keep track of all the keep an update of all the pets available and have people use the app to find pets. But we realized we did not have the time or the expertise to do that ourselves. So in every stage, we had to kind of readjust, pivot, make it kind of more practical. So, working on a program like this in the classroom, you're going to get students that want to save the world legitimately. And I think that's one great thing about doing something like this with students is they have that enthusiasm, right? It really hasn't been worn out of them through just, life experiences. They still have that kind of, that youthful ambition to really want to tackle big, difficult things. So, as we, the facilitators, we really have to try to narrow their focus and kind of make it more tangible. And that's one thing I like about the whole entrepreneurial aspect is you can have this big, bold ambition, but it also needs to be grounded in reality. And that was some of the the processes that we went through, you know, not only in terms of concept, you know, thinking big, but then realizing it may be too big, but other aspects as well. So I would say that for this project, the fire was really cooking those last few weeks, you know, which is typical when you're working with students. You know, they start off real high. Let me get my camera. They start off real high, and then it kind of like starts slumping down, and then there's the deadline, and then it shoots up, right? It shoots up. That's kind of what I noticed with this group. So those few weeks before presentation day, that's when, you know, everyone, that fire was back on, and we actually had to start planting actual things and forming actual products that we were going to do. So the students there presented. They did really well. If I'm not mistaken, I believe they got third place out of 8, which is pretty good, I'd say. And yeah, I'll take a moment to ask anyone if they have any questions, if you want me to reiterate anything I just said or anything like that. I'll give everyone a moment here. No, that's fine. I've noticed the good thing about getting older is I'm more than comfortable just talking and talking and talking.
Kyle, I have a question for you. This is Melissa.
Sure. Hey, Melissa.
And I'll just remind others that if you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly. We would love to hear from you. What do you think your students, like, kind of their like biggest lesson learned was in this process? I know that might have been different for a number of students, but just kind of as a whole, what do you see as like their kind of the biggest thing that they learned?
For this project specifically, the biggest thing they learned is that they had to create this project that had some kind of foundational connection with revenue. So even though this is a fictitious group, not a fictitious group, but even though they weren't legitimately going to try to take this to market and to actually launch it as an actual business, one thing that they did get told during the presentation is that kind of the financial part of this project was flimsy. That it really wasn't even there. And that was something that, in hindsight, they realized, well, yeah, if we're trying to, even though it's, you know, it's just a service that we're developing, it will have costs, and we will have to, you know, somehow pay for things. So for the whole entrepreneurship idea for students, this idea of financial accountability and having the dollars and cents, or at least the idea of how this is going to be paid for, or how you're going to produce a revenue stream, I think is something very new to students, and it makes sense. I mean, many students haven't had to deal with personal finances, much less, you know, kind of business finances. So, and really I don't think that they're really exposed to kind of that frame of reference of dollars and cents really at all until they start looking at applying for college and realizing, oh, this comes at a heavy price tag. You know, how am I gonna swing this? I really want, you know, XYZ, but I only make, you know, so much. How am I going to figure this out? So, yeah, the biggest barrier, or the biggest lesson learned, I think, from this group, and then from any group, whether it's a student project or an actual legitimate small business is the dollars and cents. And that's something, unfortunately, that isn't really focused on, and it is, to some people, it is a trial by fire. And actually, if you think about it, having students go through this in a safe environment of kind of creating a project, entrepreneurship project, will help them, I think, initially realize that there are these things that matter, right? That you do have to think about your bottom line, and even if you are building something that is a social good that does have justice in it in some form or fashion, with the way that our economy is structured, it's not going to miraculously be paid for, you know. So I think that was the biggest lesson learned from them. As far as the entrepreneurship stages, another one is just commitment. How much commitment you need to produce a well thought out and mindful product. That's probably another one there. And just something that pops into my head, I think, is the idea that the more research you do, the more likely you're going to change your initial product. And a lot of students may come in thinking that this first idea is the best idea, but when they actually start going through the process, the entrepreneurship process, you know, like the SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, when they start looking at all of these angles, all of these different avenues, then they realize that their initial idea isn't as strong as they thought. And if they're not comfortable with that change, they're going to have a hard time. Right? They have to be pretty malleable, and luckily students tend to be malleable. So.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and transition to the idea of where students can find problems. Because going through Startup Weekend, one thing that a lot of the mentors there kept bringing up was what pain are you alleviating? Like, what's the pain point? Where is the problem? And is the problem great enough to cause people to want some kind of change or some kind of service, something that would make people act and respond? So as I mentioned earlier, the best place to start, especially for students, is to encourage them to look at their own experiences and consider what's meaningful to them. For instance, in the upcoming weeks, my computer science class is going to work on a unit very similar to what we're discussing here, where they're going to take everything that we've learned so far this year in computer science and try to solve a problem that they feel is present on campus. And most of my class are juniors and seniors, and I think the biggest concern that a lot of them have, a very tangible concern that I'm going to suggest to them, is student parking. So the parking on campus is a scarce resource. A lot of students either can't afford all of the things that it takes for them to get on the insurance for the vehicle, or they can't pay for, you know, the little tag to park there. And every once in a while the administration comes in and they start enforcing it. For instance, today they sent out an email that's actually towed 2 vehicles. And every once in a while I have my seniors coming in late because they heard that, they're going to go check on the car to see if they're valid. So they, between classes, they ran outside, got in their car, parked across the street, and then came back to campus. So I feel like if I present this problem to my students and have them try to think of kind of interesting ways on how to deal with this real-world problem, I think that they're going to come out with something pretty interesting. So if you really want buy-in from students when working on these projects, you want to connect it to their own experiences, you want to make it meaningful to them. As we talked about earlier, me and my group during Startup Weekend created this company called Cell to Cell, which is an idea to make correspondence with incarcerated people easier and more authentic. Unless you have had to go through the process of communicating with someone who is incarcerated, who's in prison, you may not know of the real problem there is. Just to give you my short story, I learned that my older sister was incarcerated. I found her. I wrote her a letter. It got initially rejected because I didn't follow some arbitrary rules in terms of how to format the letter and what can go inside of the envelope. So it took close to 2 months before I actually was able to establish correspondence. And I felt like just the basic barriers of communication, sitting down and writing a letter and mailing it out, is a real one. Just a few months ago, during election time, I believe, during the 2016 election, during the 2016 election, there's this kind of news stories about how millennials didn't really understand how mailing works, how to get a stamp and that whole process. And a few months ago, one of my seniors actually asked me how to address a letter. Right, so I showed him, the return address goes here, where you're sending it to goes here. This is where you put the postage. There's this pretty archaic concept, which seems kind of normal for those of us that have gone through it, but maybe not so much for the younger generation. So, long story short, I saw that as a potential pain point and developed an idea to make that correspondence not only easier but more authentic. So you really want to start with getting them personally invested. Another, brainstorming is always a really smart thing to do. So you can even do it with the whole class. Is to create a problem bank with students, before you even put them in their little project corners. Teach them the importance of actually getting real-world data, having them go out and survey people around them in their community. It doesn't have to just be campus-oriented. It could be neighborhood-oriented. It could be city-oriented. And that is another kind of important entrepreneurial lesson that I learned going through the whole startup process is you may have a great idea, you may think it's awesome, but how real is it? Like, have you gone out and talked to people to see if this is something that they really want? So part of that startup weekend is we had to go out and actually get tangible data, real-world data. So helping students brainstorm for ideas, it could be something as like having them go out and survey their peers. And you can always just do general searches, like you can go to the United Nations. They have a curriculum to help guide students on creating solutions for world problems. If you're maybe wanting to make this more of a hypothetical kind of worldwide thing, you can surely pull a world problem. There are plenty of problems in the world that they can pull from, and still go through the same process, learn the same things that are needed in terms of brainstorming, collecting data, finding out how feasible it is, and what steps are needed to actually, make it work. Even if you're working on a fictitious problem, it's the learning is still there. And depending on access to city leaders, we can always reach out to them and find kind of rural problems within their community. So I'm not sure if anyone wants to chime in on any comments or questions that I've been discussing about. I'll give you a moment. Okay, so we talked about brainstorming, and if you can see the slide there, there's a Scamper Technique. Again, there are a lot of different types of techniques that you can find. There's actually quite a bit of kind of like entrepreneurial, small business, kind of startup type material that is available. This is one that's there, a brainstorming technique. I'm sure if you're a teacher, you're probably familiar with this type of like brainstorming technique. Brenda, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, so I use this Scamper technique with my middle schoolers because often they're not really ready to originate ideas, from nothing. So the Scamper process actually takes existing technology and you run it through a series of questions. Each, S for substitute, each of those segments has a series of questions. And so then you're able to sort of either improve or create a completely new technology. And that really helped them push themselves, I think, in a way, at their level. Also, for me, I was able to then work with some of the core teachers and center in on specific things that they were going over in their class. And so we would research the technologies based on different topics in their class and use the Scamper process to then improve from something existing. So that's just one idea. It also is actually used a lot in human interface designing. So it's something that they might see in the real world or might sort of be a good thing to have in their back pocket. It was really easy to implement, and I think it really helped at that age to start the thinking process without feeling like they had to kind of just come up with, ideas magically. It felt less intimidating to them, I think.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one short-sighted aspect of how I operate sometimes. I tend to be an idea guy, so ideas come easy to me, but when I throw it to my students, they a lot of times they do struggle. They really have a hard time coming up with just even problems, to find. And then that next stage of ideas can be a pretty steep hill to climb. So yeah, having the Scamper technique or any other technique that you've used before to help students in projects. So I'm an English teacher by trade, so I'm kind of used to helping students kind of brainstorm and develop like ideas to write about. So they're kind of writing strategies. So even if this whole idea of entrepreneurship is multidisciplinary. Whether you teach chemistry or computer science or English, I think as a teacher, you've kind of developed these ways to help your students kind of think about things and brainstorm things. And even if you haven't, there's plenty of available resources to help kind of get that thought process started. So the next thing I want to talk about is a pretty big and serious concept, or maybe not so much an issue. I mean, it all depends, but student collaboration. So I think a lot of students, they've probably gone through the process of where they had to work in groups, but for entrepreneurship purposes, it's always good to try to structure them in a way to where each student has some kind of specialty, some kind of strength that they could bring in to the table. So for let's say we're going to do entrepreneurship and CS, the best way to kind of think about grouping a team is to have at least one technical expert, one domain expert, one business savvy student, and one creative thinker. That kind of covers all the bases. There's this old saying that over-specialization breeds in weakness. If you have a bunch of tech people that, know how to write script and can program, up the wazoo, they may have those skills, but if they don't have someone keeping them grounded in terms of, business applicability, if you don't have someone kind of with the breadth of knowledge on whatever issue that they're dealing with, if you don't have someone that can think outside the box, that can really stifle them. So you really, if available, if the resource is available, try to have one of those each in a group. You can also teach them the Scrum methodology of project management. So you can find plenty of resources available on Scrum methodology. You just type in that keyword Scrum. But this essentially helps them document and keep track of the project as they're going through it. One stifling thing that students can face is trying to look at the big picture all the time, and they just get overwhelmed with looking at what they have to do in its entirety in one instance. So an idea is to kind of give them more smaller targeted objectives that they work towards that essentially build up to this larger project. Not only does this kind of chunking help them manage the whole project, but importantly, it catches any kind of missteps or mistakes early on. The last thing you want to do is to create this huge project and realize you're missing one critical feature that has it, just imploding on itself. So kind of these short spurts of let's do this, then that, let's build up to this big project with all these small projects, and we'll put out these small fires as we get to them and not let it turn into a 4-alarm fire, is a way to kind of keep the groups working together and working towards an obtainable goal so that they can actually achieve something significant together. And just kind of showing you the general process of how pitching an idea works. And when we say pitch an idea, it's just another way of, it's kind of like a glorified sales pitch. It's as if you're trying to sell a product or a service to investors. And one thing that pops into my head is that Shark Tank show. I never really watched it, but I know of it. So this whole pitch idea is pretty much kind of what Shark Tank is. You have these people with an idea, they pitch it to these investors, and then, all the hilarity ensues. But there are actually different levels of pitching. You have your elevator pitch. So they call it an elevator pitch because it's supposed to be, 30 seconds, about the time you ride in an elevator. And to kind of use an analogy, we're taking a movie poster, right? So when you look at a movie poster, you get just a snapshot on what that might be. So elevator pitch is a real quick, this is what this product does for this thing or this service, real quick. You go from that very simple elevator pitch to a pitch deck. So pitch decks is again another way of kind of saying a glorified kind of presentation. So you'll have a collection of slides. The pitch deck will be about 5 to 7 minutes in length, and you give your 5-minute spiel to investors or to judges or to whomever you're trying to appeal to. So that's the equivalent of a movie trailer. You get your 2.5 minutes of the wham and the bam, and you'll laugh, you cry, this is for everybody, right, type thing. And the full pitch would be typically a 30-minute long type of presentation. So this is the behind-the-scenes featurette of a film. So for a full pitch, this is, I guess, like if you're thinking of it in a school setting, this would be almost kind of like half of a period long of someone going through and explaining, in detail all of these aspects of this project or proposal or whatever they're working on. So I think for the school setting, you'd probably lead towards that pitch deck 5-minute presentation. To prepare them for that, you may have them create an elevator pitch, have them tell you in 30 seconds, what is this? And you can actually use that to do real quick on the spot assessment. And a reminder, if you go to each group after, let's say they've worked for a few days, for a week, you're like, okay, give me your pitch. And you sit there and you listen to them, and at that point in time you can be like, well, I'm not sure about that, or I really like this idea. How about you tell me more about this? And it keeps them on their toes, and it keeps them kind of focused on whatever project they're working on. So it's kind of that concept there. And we have kind of a breakout here of that pitch deck. Let's say you're going to have them do final presentations. You have about 7 slides, give them 5 minutes. They introduce the story, the problem, the solution, how it works, technical analyses, market analyses, and what's next. What's great about doing this is it helps them develop those soft skills, those presentation skills. It really forces them to know what they're talking about, things like that. And since I mentioned soft skills, and that's, I'm not sure if you know what soft skills are, but it's essentially those interpersonal skills, the ability to communicate with someone, the ability to listen to what someone has to say, to be critical in a positive way, to really kind of work through problems together and not try to butt heads and not try to shut each other out. The skills that they learned in working in these groups under this kind of unified goal is something that I've heard a lot from the private sector. I've learned that, or they've mentioned that this is something that is critical right? A student can have all the technical skill in the world, especially in the computer science realm, but if they cannot work with people, if they cannot work in groups, if they cannot handle those interpersonal skills effectively, it just doesn't work. So having them go through this project-based learning, having them go through what can be a rigorous yet very exciting project, not only helps them sharpen their skills technically, but also those interpersonal skills that are actually very critical in the real world. So that's all I got, everybody. We reached our end. I'm not sure if you have any questions for me or Brenda, anything I can shore up, or anything you'd like us to elaborate on. You can take this opportunity to chime in.
I have a question for you, Kyle. As far as your high school students went, what was the hardest part of the process for them, or the biggest hurdle in the process?
So for the CivTech group, the hardest part was to get everyone together at the same time in the same place. Since it was voluntary, it was really hard to get all those cats in that one bag. When I do this in the classroom, I won't have that problem specifically. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to, is not having to like chase people down and get things from them.
Oh, we have a question here in the chat pod from Debbie. How did you find the teamwork with neurodiverse kids?
Yeah, that's what I found that worked, and I think this is something that was critical for me as a facilitator. I did have some students that I could tell. There's one in particular that I could tell didn't really work well in the kind of extroverted large group setting. So what I actually did is we would all talk as a group. We would narrow down what everyone's kind of objectives were, what they were specifically going to work on. I made sure that everyone agreed that they felt comfortable working on that specific assignment, and then I allowed them to independently work. And then the next week we came back together and put it all together. So for a student that maybe doesn't work well working intimately with other students, I set it up to where they had an objective, they had a target, and they could work on it, you know, at their speed, basically.
So I teach middle school, and so I'm sure a lot of the teachers already do this, where for me, I also made sure, you know, to set up the conversation about what good collaboration looks like for, you know, so they could all sort of have a model and know, you know, when to seek my help specifically. I found the Scrum methodology, which is basically kind of what you described there as well, Kyle, is in sort of chunking things, having accountability, having a set of jobs essentially, so that helps a lot for each student to not feel like they were responsible for somebody else's part, et cetera. It's a lot of knowing your students and a lot of paying attention to them during the more open moments of the collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
I know we have some people that are new to entrepreneurship and some that have done this before. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in with questions.
I'll say just one more thing. I don't think a lot of students will have the opportunity to kind of go through this entrepreneurial opportunity unless they like personally have some kind of drive. I feel like if you if you show the students that they can, in fact, work on something that can come wholly from them, that they don't have to kind of tether themselves to a company or a corporation or some kind of like a large entity that may make them feel like just, you know, an odd one piece of this thing, that they can actually, you know, be independent, and that there's actually a platform to create that independence and that kind of personal growth, and introducing that to them right in this safe space, I think will have a lot of students realize that, you know, this could be a viable option, that they could go out and become, you know, a successful entrepreneur when they learn that it exists, and that there's actually a bit of a rule book, a vague, you know, very basic rule book, but that there's actually something there that they can kind of follow and then make their own.
As far as teaching, middle school for me too, I think I found that the students were more engaged, and I think it was in part because there is a certain template or a backbone to doing like a pitch deck or a startup, but then there's also a lot of latitude and a lot of creativity, so it brought in engagement for more of the kids than normally. And in some of my classes, you know, I do video production and et cetera, so we do a lot of collaborative projects, and this one I think entrepreneurship offers a higher level of engagement across the board than I've seen in other projects. That's pretty exciting. And I think it's easy to implement as a teacher as well, I'd also like to say. You know, with that backbone, it allows, it's easy to sort of jump in as needed.
Yeah, I agree. I noticed that Debbie asks about the students' interest in entrepreneurship after the challenge. I know afterwards I asked them if they, since most of them are freshmen, I asked them if they would do this again, and they readily said yes. I think they really did enjoy the whole process of creating something from nothing, trying to solve a real-world problem, and having fun while doing it. So I feel strongly that once students are exposed to entrepreneurship, they're going to want to see it more, and they're going to want to do it more.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kyle, for your insight, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I just wanted to do, you know, make a shout out to CS for All Teachers, who is hosting this tonight. Membership, of course, is free. You can connect with computer science teachers across the nation, participate in free webinars like this. There's a lot of free resources. They've started adding multimedia presentations that you can access at any time. And of course, you can learn about the ECS, CFP curricula, and et cetera. So if you can make sure you take a moment and fill out that Survey Monkey, it really helps ensure that we're providing resources that teachers are looking for. Thank you so much again, everybody, for joining.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Take care, everyone. Have a great night.